Give me the thumbs up when you're ready, Matt. Okay. Well, greetings. Good to see you. Well, I only got greetings. Someone say hi. Yeah, okay. All right. Hi. Good to see you as well. Well, welcome back. We've had a little bit of a break. We met up into December. I guess it was about the second or third week of December, and have taken a nice little hiatus, and we're back together again. Let me, before I kind of jump in, to introduce you to the book and our topic and kind of the overview of our kind of the 3 nights that we're going to use to devote to this book. Let me pray for us. So let's pray together. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the possibility of friendship and of community, of being knit together with people who are different from us, who see the world differently, think differently, that we might actually become something different ourselves through that interaction. Fuller, perhaps seeing the world differently, with more of the beauty that's in it. Be with us as we consider what does it mean to be a community, and knit us more together. That's our prayer, oh God. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. So, so this is night 1 of 3 nights that we're going to be devoting to the book Living into Community. We do have, I think, a couple of copies left. We've sold, I think, almost all the ones that we ordered, which were about 15. So my recommendation is to go to your favorite bookseller if you're interested and you weren't able to get one and we've run out, but you want to read through the book. The book is by an author, Christine Pohl, and so what I want to do is kind of tell you why I picked this book, and then kind of give you a little bit of a layout of the 3 sessions, and then Sarah is going to actually lead us through our first session tonight. So when I went to graduate school, I started my PhD program in 99. I can't remember. I got to shake it all up in there. I'd already been to seminary, but I wanted to go off and I wanted to do my PhD. And so when I went, I discovered a book called Making Room, Recovering the Art, I think, or the Practice of Christian Hospitality. And this was a book written by Christine Pohl, and it was, I found it to be a very important and significant book for me personally. I think it also generated a lot of conversations in churches and in the academy, in part because I think, just speaking from my seat, I felt that the kind of, thank you, yeah. Man, somebody, I was like, wait a minute. The experience that I had been, or the nature of the Christian gospel that I had been exposed to up to that time, I felt was truncated, and in some ways, it didn't capture, in a sense, the bigger message that I thought Jesus was about. It was if you say the sinner's prayer, and you repent, Jesus is going to love you. That's my southern version of it. And that didn't really seem to me to be the full possibility of what Jesus was about. And so when I was reading Christine Pohl's book, one of the things that she argued there was that the practice of hospitality was not just a side thing that was nice for Christians to do. It was, in fact, an essential expression of the gospel. It was an expression not just of the church, but of the Christian life itself. And I found that to be a compelling argument. And she made that argument based on looking not only at the biblical text, but also much of early Christian history. And I think she brought it almost up to the eve of the Reformation when we began to see a hospitality kind of industry, I suppose, develop later on. But so that book was very powerful for me for that reason. And Christine Pohl has since passed away. She passed away a couple years ago, I think. And she wrote a second book, which is the one that we have in front of us. This is Living into Community, Cultivating Practices that Sustain Us. And some of the reviews came back, and it sounded like this was sort of a distillation in a way of some of her insights of thinking about the nature of community, not just of hospitality, but community more broadly. And so I thought it would be very interesting to revisit Christine for those reasons. I think also, though, our own community, right, needs time and opportunity to reflect on, well, what exactly is a healthy community? What is a theology of community? How is this rooted in some sense in the divine life and maybe in the life that God is, or Jesus is calling us into together? I think this book is kind of interesting too because it's very praxis-oriented. It seems to be the result of a larger project where Christine talks about over many years working with many churches. So you get little stories and snippets in here of community being practiced in certain kinds of settings. She talks about 4 practices or 4 sort of key things that Christians are supposed to engage in. Gratitude, these are sort of the pillars of community. She describes them as gratitude, promise-keeping, truth-telling, and hospitality. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about gratitude. I will say that this, like all of the books that I have chosen for us to wrestle with, I'm not choosing them so that you will agree with them. I'm not choosing them because I agree with them. I'm choosing them, I think, because they are evocative, provocative texts. So I'm assuming that this one will also, there'll be things that you don't agree with. Maybe it'll be very different, though, than the last book where that was also a part of our process. So anyway, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah because tonight she's going to do an intro of the book. She's going to talk also or kind of bring us into the first significant kind of practice or virtue of gratitude. Next week we'll come back and we're going to focus on truth-telling and promise-keeping. And then the last week we will be engaging the question of hospitality. And part of without stealing any of Sarah's thunder, part of the challenge and the opportunity, I think, is for us, each of us, and perhaps us together, to start to formulate, well, what should a theology of community look like in this place and time? So with that, Sarah.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out on a chilly Wednesday night as a community gathered together to talk about community. So just to pick up a little bit where Christian did, I think a big thing that I want to say and to affirm, maybe not shockingly, is I think that we all have our own experiences of community, our beliefs about what community ought to be or what we desire for it to be. And so much of what we'll thread through these 3 sessions is wanting to have time for us to talk and also reflect and wrestle together with what are our hopes, what are our pains, what are our longings, how do we understand the invitation of what it means to be a Christian community and how we want to keep living into that. And so, with what Christian named already, I actually wanted us to start then, in view of that, by asking you all at your tables, if you're gathered, or if you're watching online, you can talk to yourself or maybe to some other people in your life. And I want you can pick up one or both of these questions, which is I want you to call to mind a powerful experience that you have had of community. And what made it powerful? Like what made it, you have warm memories, it was transformative. So call to mind an experience of community that in just a powerful, beautiful way has impacted you or that sits with you, okay? I'm not gonna ask you yet to talk to each other, but I want you to think about that. And then alternatively, recognizing this may actually be the same community. What has been a painful experience that you have had of community? And what was painful about it? Okay. Now you can share about either or neither or both of those. And so at your gathered table, if you don't all know each other, make sure to say hello. And then with any of these, you can say, oh, if you'd like to share, oh, I'd actually like to share about whichever. Or if you're like, I'm just going to listen or I'm not going to share, that's okay too. So again, what's a powerful, beautiful experience you've had a community and why? And or what's also a painful experience you've had and what was painful, okay? So I want to start there as a way of getting our own imaginations and stories, which I think are so important because we bring all our stories to community. So let's start there. I'll kind of see how everyone's doing, but let's say about, we're going to take about 10 to 12 minutes would be my estimate. We'll kind of see how we do, okay? How are you all doing at the tables? If I give another minute, is that long enough? Okay, one more minute, then we'll come back together. Okay, I'll invite whoever's sharing to wrap up, and we'll come back together as a whole group. Well, thank you so much for sharing with one another and hearing each other. And again, wanted to ground us in this space because we all have our own stories. And whether or not we have overt theological beliefs about community, you actually do have some, right? You have your own sense of what community ought to be, what it should look like, what it has looked like when it's felt at its best from your vantage point. So I want to just surface that. So I actually want us to be able to, as we heard a little bit at our tables, thanks, my nose itches. Jeff will go around. So just an open space here on the whiteboard. They have, and again, recognizing life is complicated and messy and can be both at the same time in the same community. What were things either you heard from one another or things from your own story that made for community experience that was beautiful or life-giving? And how about, or painful, harmful? What were some of the things you heard, or were there some themes at your table? So if anyone I know I didn't ask for a scribe at your table, so if anyone is feeling so compelled to share, if you would just raise your hand, and Jeff has the mic, and we could share a little bit of what we heard. Anne will go. Thanks, Anne, for kicking us off.
This is very brief. Actions speak louder than words.
Actions speak louder than words. And that probably could go both ways, right? Where it's like you've seen what happens in beautiful ways through actions, and also in ways that were harmful or not helpful.
I guess we talked about helpful.
Okay. I'll get a different one. All right, great. Someone else.
Right here.
Hi, good sir.
When Suzanne's parents moved to town from Chicago, they went around and visited churches. And we went with them just to kind of uphold them.
Yeah.
And we went to, 5 or 6 churches here in the suburbs, not including Colonial, because I think they decided they wanted to make their own place. But some of these places we went to and some of the places we were even introduced from the pulpit as visitors, and no one came up to speak to us. So it's the sense of being an outsider, and no one even makes a gesture of welcoming you in.
Thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry that happened. And we probably, many or most of us have had an experience both of literally, who's all the visitors? And then you're like, literally nobody? Nobody's going to talk to me? I literally had to stand up in the middle of the thing. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing. Others?
And we had the opposite of that when we had Joanne Metcalf here. She was a real mover and shaker. I think there's a word for that, animateur, which is the French pronunciation of what it says, animator. There are people that just make things happen.
Okay,
I've seen her run down people in the parking lot.
great. Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, we had one person kind of spoke to that a single person can become your community, or could be your door into the community. So those churches that you visited may have had community, but you didn't have access to it because there was nobody to bring you in. So I don't know how you.
Great, thanks for sharing. Yeah, Erin?
So I'll highlight some of the themes across us. One of the things on the left that was beautiful, life-giving, were opportunities for people to really get to know each other. Whether
Getting
it
to
was
know each other.
community dinners or having like a really intentional time where people were working together on something, and they really had that sort of deep time to get to know each other. We also talked about the actions speak louder than words, I think, where people in time of need, having others in a community really help to meet those needs, whether it's illness or injury or whatever it is, feeling just like really supported. And then on the flip side, we talked about the challenges when people leave community. And there sometimes aren't really elegant ways for the community to know how to understand when people leave. And it was almost like needing some sort of feedback loop so that when that person or household is in the larger community and you come in contact, like, so how are we now? You know, kind of like
Yep.
figuring that out. And I think one other thing was just maybe it's getting to know each other, but the power of honesty and really being able to tell people what you think in a loving way, and kind of hold each other accountable to truth and to, I guess, the standard of what we're all here to do. That when that can happen in the right way, it's pretty powerful.
Thank you.
That was a lot, sorry.
Do you see other hands, Jeff?
Jeff. There's people pondering.
One of the things I said, so my, on the Beautiful Life Giving, my favorite experience of community that I've ever had was actually our best couple friend, Sarah and Ty. They lived next door to us, or lived in our basement for 2 months and then next door to us for a year. And I said it was like the best thing about it was like it was college with emotionally mature adults who had gone to therapy. And so, like, to me, what I would say is one of the most...
So it's rare.
Yeah, we haven't lived with anyone else since then. But what was beautiful and life-giving is I think people who were doing their own work to be grown-ups and like being honest about being in process so we could have difficult conversations, but do it with breath space. So that I would say people doing their own work. Yeah. Did that raise anything for you, Alice?
Not yet, until she has her mic.
Not yet, yes. She's still pondering. Oh, Alice, what were your thoughts?
Actions speak louder than words, but I want to put in a good word for words. Because words are awfully important.
Words.
And words can be
Of.
encouragement, words of
Affirmation, maybe. Love, encouragement.
and noticing someone
Noticing.
by name. And then words can also be very negative and harmful.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna pause. Recognize if you want to add before you leave tonight. If you're like my thing didn't get heard, there are markers up here, and you can put them on the board. Okay. All right. Recognizing there are so many other parts of our own stories that we carry that have been made for, and thank you everyone who did share for sharing, that have made for beautiful, powerful experiences of community and ones that have been painful. And sometimes that's been in the same place, right? Like typical relationship of being human, right? So she, in her book, so this is what we're doing this work, as Christian said, as a community. And I think around some of those questions of why community, why church, so she in this book is taking that up, and why she thinks community matters, and what are the practices that sustain the church and can also help us to be church together. I'm going to go a little bit into the intro before going to the first section. So one of the things I love, and if you have a book, you're welcome. I'm going to reference some things where you're welcome to turn there. At the bottom of page 2, She names, and I know, is that a laugh because you have the whole of page 2 highlighted? Yes. Kimpa found me on Sunday and said that I'm putting your business on the street. Is that okay? Okay. Kimpa basically had pages 1 through 5 all highlighted. So I was like, that's all I need to do then. I'll just do pages 1 to 5 and we'll be good. Don't tell Christian. Hi. I've tried to tell Christian that me throwing him under the bus is a signifier of my deep affection and trust for him, because the only person I throw under the buses regularly is named Andy Garbers. So he doesn't believe me, though. He doesn't believe me. So anyway, at the bottom of page 2, what she names, she's talking about the connection between the gospel and between the life of Jesus and community. So I'm going to actually start in the second full sentence. The Word who became flesh and lived among us, Jesus, full of grace and truth, expects that our relationships with one another will also be characterized by grace and truth. And so for 2,000 years, Jesus' followers have been forming communities built and sustained by love, though often fractured by sin and corruption. And so just one of the things is whatever you read of this book, as you're thinking about your own theology of community as a Christian, what does it mean that the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us? And how does that evocatively move or inform how we're trying to be community together? So she just, in this space, she names a few things. She names our human longing for community, in the introduction, and names what makes for community. And throughout it, she talks about also what makes for the breakdown of community and relationships. And she talks about, how it's not just shared experiences that sustain a community, but the risks and the necessary growth that are a part of that. One of the things that I do want to name, and I'm just going to touch on what Christian said as it relates to this text. One of the things that we really try to practice with any of our texts or with any of the teachings is that aspect of wrestling, and of being able to notice, as you read a text, what's really resonating for you, what's frustrating, what are you drawn toward, what makes you want to throw things, if you feel violent while reading books at all, which maybe all of you don't and only I do. Just to be able to get reflective about that. So, because for instance, for me as a reader, there's a lot of things in this text that I really appreciate. I think she's raising really important stuff around community and wrestling with it. And for me, a couple critiques that I have as I was reading it, is to be able to name, I think in her wanting to move us into deeply theological language, there's a way at times where I think she's privileging or kind of making for some of the divide between what is sacred or secular, where she's like, yes, theology and psychology and organizational leadership can be helpful. Not really. Really, the focus we need to talk about is the theological imagination. Now, she is trained as a theologian, too. So to name this as part of her own formation and training, and that's impacting her work. But for me, spoiler alert, if you don't know this by now, my own theology is deeply formed by my understanding and what I've learned about psychological theory, and how I think about how sanctification in conversation with healing of attachment wounds. So just to say, as a reader, I notice that as I read. Or I'm noticing that she's not talking about, she doesn't have a lot of space to really name the experiences of people who've been really abused in church. She'll kind of reference, but she doesn't really go there. And again, a lot of my friends and some of my own story is deeply shaped by profound trauma in church, right? And so she's kind of allowing space, but she's coming from her own location. Does that mean I don't get anything from her book? No. But I just want to name that, because any number of texts we'll read, we will have different responses. And being able to notice that so we can keep wrestling and growing together, as Christian said. So I just want to acknowledge you may be even coming into a conversation about Christian community and church and have your own deep story that impacts how you approach this conversation and how you may read this text. And I just want to encourage you that the Spirit is in it with you, whatever's going on, and just keep listening, as we're in this. So as Christian named, there's 4 different practices that she is turning to, that she believes these practices help us to be able to sustain community. And it's the promise-keeping, truthfulness, hospitality, and gratitude. So how she then organizes, if you've not yet had an opportunity to read, how she organizes each part around those 4 things is into 3 sections within it. And the one is she looks at basically the biblical, theological, and history of the Christian church as it relates to how we understand or think about this practice or how it has been understood. Then she looks at what are some of the complications of this practice. And then finally, she looks at both the ways in which this practice can become deformed, or I would say like harmfully embodied in community, and then also some of the ways to strengthen it, that we can deepen into it as a practice, okay? And she ends up naming, which is where we'll turn then, that she starts with gratitude first, because for her, fundamentally, gratitude is the response to grace. And grace is the fundamental thing that animates the Christian life. And so for her, that's why she starts there. So I'm going to pause. Any thoughts or responses or questions so far before foraying into thoughts about gratitude? Okay, that was a lot of words, so I just wanted to at least pause. Okay. Let's go into the gratitude and talk a little bit about what she names here, and then I'm gonna basically, so I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you an overview of this section, and then I'm gonna have us end our time with some of our own questions and conversation around gratitude. Okay, so I'll do a little bit of an overview after each chapter. Though I'll pause for a second, but I will give you time at the end to be able to then talk about gratitude. So I'm gonna lay this out. Okay, so chapter 2 is entitled Grateful Heart. So this is the chapter in which she's saying, here's some of the history of how, and biblical grounding for understanding gratitude. And so she really starts by rooting it in our experience of grace and how to be redeemed by grace, to know grace in our lives, the response to that ought to be, and most often is, gratitude and thanks. And what does it mean that becomes the grounding place for Christians as we then become a people of gratitude that's deeply rooted in that place? And she argues in this why she thinks gratitude is vital for a community. And for a community, again, right, this is how we can sustain ourselves. There was a comedian who I will not say because he got offloaded for a while and came back, but he had this lovely bit that he did where he talked about how you're in an airplane, you're literally flying through the air, and everything is magical and amazing, and like the internet isn't going fast enough, and so you're like just so angry. And he's like, you are in a tin can flying through the air and you're not falling. Everything is amazing and nobody's happy, And so I think in her own theological way, she's saying a version of this. Is she's like, when we don't ground ourselves in the gratitude that literally all of our lives, everything is a miracle and evidence of God's grace, we can end up going sideways as a people, individually, but as a community, right? Just even saying, right, like if the only emails that Christian ever gets from me are all about everything he ever does wrong, under the bus, as Christian said, that's not what I do in my under the bus to you. Like that's just like can be so demoralizing, right? And frankly, who wants to be part of a community? Like if really Meeting House Church is that terrible and there's nothing good, including last Sunday, everything was awful. Like no one wants to be here for that, right? And she's naming that like as a community, when we lose sight of the wonder and the things for which we have so much to be grateful for, it ends up toxifying our community life together. And so she talks about that and is inviting folks to really be able to reground themselves in what are the moments of gratitude that help that we've experienced together. It's kind of like you think about the people of Israel, they would always build like rock cairn basically, or an altar of some sort to say God showed up here. with that affirmation that humans forget about God's goodness. And so we need to be reminded so we can say, oh, remember, like that was actually super lovely, and be able to have that give us a deepened fuel to move forward. She also talks about the role of worship, and worship as its own, you look at so many of the Psalms and they're about Thanksgiving and how important that is. And she also talks about the connection between gratitude and being able then to live out of an overflow of love. So I've received, right, I give. This isn't rocket science, I don't think, to most of us, but she names that. She also, I think, helpfully and importantly names that gratitude is not about then denying hard times. Like, Michelle's like, oh, today was really hard. I'm like, but Michelle, just be grateful. Like, she's saying, no, this is not about denying hard times, but it's about if we completely lose our moorings in what sustains us, the miracles, the gratitude we have, that it can break us apart. And then one of the things she names is then she believes that we are in a contemporary culture in which gratitude is not a thing. So these would be one of those moments where I'd be like, really? I actually think gratitude practices, like a lot of people do those, and like a lot of traditions that aren't Christian, they practice gratitude, maybe for a different reason. Now, does that mean everyone's practicing gratitude, or we don't have some aspects of our culture that lack gratitude? Yes. So we're gonna go with, she's offering us an invitation to notice how maybe we are not fully internalizing gratitude. And so she names some of the ways that in our culture and time, we can be so frenetic and kind of like everything is miraculous, so nothing matters and we're not grateful for anything. We can get really entitled. We can become deeply consumeristic. So even I think about sometimes, during COVID, the amount of work that it took to produce the weekly services was a lot, okay? I didn't go to Hollywood to become a movie producer. Like, I don't actually know how to do that, just in case you don't know that, right? It took a lot of time. Guess what? Did it look like a Marvel comic thing every Sunday? Did Jeff fly out of the sky? No. But being able to, what am I saying? But like, sometimes it would be like, well, this really wasn't high enough quality. I'm like, do you know how much it costs to make a Marvel film? If you want to donate that much to the church, we can probably get there. Sort of thing. But that can happen to us when we're in such, she's critiquing the way some of that consumerism or just entitlement can impact us and really keep us from experiencing gratitude. And so she fundamentally says, listen, folks, as church, a culture of gratitude is about being a people who bear witness to the beautiful grace of God. So let's call ourselves to live from that place of the gift that life is, right? It's really, gratitude is charis, which is grace. It's this, gratitude and grace are so connected. So she then talks about she's like, okay, and this is Sarah translating her, in chapter 3. There are complications, though. The deal with gratitude, you can't expect it. It can't be obligated, right? Well, you should be grateful. That always helps everybody, I find. And that sometimes it can be hard when there's like shared work. How do we name our gratitude in those sorts of spaces? And she talks about how we need to hold gratitude and justice together. She names the challenging community. What happens when someone gives a gift you don't want? So for instance, someone's like, I'll volunteer to do this. And everyone's like, oh, geez, I don't know about that. What do we, how do we express gratitude in that space? Or what happens when the gifts come from folks that are super complicated and it's a really fraught moment with them? It can just be challenging. And so she just names those are some of the complications, and how do we then remember rightly, though her thing is like, again, how do we remember rightly God's love for us? In the 4th chapter, then going deeper, this is where she looks at the deformations. Deformations, is that right? Yeah. And then how we can live into it. So she says, here's the deal. When we're in community, some ways that gratitude can go sideways is when we get overly in a space of envy. If we were just more if we just had that, we can lose sight again of the beauty of what we do have. she talks about some deformation of gratitude is grumbling, and the way that it can be like, everything's terrible and awful all the time. Or when gratitude, we can be like, oh, I'm grateful, now you owe me, sort of thing. I'm sure you could think of other ways that gratitude can get deformed or malformed in community. I think when it can be overly falsely positivistic, where you're like, you must be grateful. Or when we can use gratitude as a way to silence and say, I know, Suzanne, you have a really important critique that I actually need to hear. And I can be like, you're not being grateful. Do you know what I did for you? I bore 12 children. And it's not true. But, those sorts of moments that some of you may have experienced in your families or things like this. So there's ways in which it can go sideways if it's not grounded in that grace. But she says, hey, if we can remember to make each day a small resurrection and make room for gratitude, like look at each other as the embodiment of God's grace, and then live in that gratitude and celebration, and fundamentally to take some Sabbath space so we can remember even, like we can be conscious, because right, you can just be going in your life, and you forget that everything is a gift. And so she's like, take the Sabbath space, okay? So that's fundamentally, she grounds us in gratitude as the response to grace, says this is important and vital for a community to be sustained. And she says, let's practice this in ways that are authentic, that help us to reground ourselves, remember God's love and grace, so we can then live that and help that to sustain us in community. So that is part 1 of the book, the Cliff Notes version written by Sarah W.G. I would like you now to be able to have some time to talk about gratitude, okay? So I'm gonna start us with one question. Which is, if you have a book, and if you don't have a book at your table, it looks like, does every table have a book? At least one book, okay. This is on page 206. There are some questions for discussion and reflection. I'm gonna have you move to question 3. It's not labeled as 3, but you can count the bullets. Question 3. Which is, which complications of gratitude are most troublesome within your community? And you don't have to remember the ones from her book. You could just be like, what are complications that you think complicate gratitude? How have we addressed them effectively? What else could be done? So think about our church as our collective community. What might be some of the complications that you've seen of what it looks like to try to be a grateful people together? And what are some ways maybe we have addressed that? And what are some of your hopes or thoughts about how we could address it more? Okay, so that is page 206, question 3. Okay, all right. I am going to ask that someone at the table have some, at least themes or some things that came up from this that they can be reporting back. So just as you're wrapping up, just if you can help that person, and we'll come back in like maybe a minute and a half or two. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to invite you back with some preemptive prompts here. The one is that I'm only going to ask for a response about what are some of the complications, okay? Whoever's giving that accounting. Because then I'm going to, once we get through all of our tables to name some of the complications, I'm going to have us move up to question 2 at our tables, which is the one, how can we work to create a culture of noticing what is good, okay? So I'm going to have us name some of the complications. I'm not going to try to solve all of them or ask us to do that, but I'm going to have us then end our night by asking how can we work to create a culture of noticing what is good, okay? So I'm going to kick us off with our table. I self-nominated myself. So which complications, some that we named that aren't necessarily in the book, that I think the complications of gratitude. One is just the challenge of change, and how change can just be hard. That there can be a nostalgia for the past of sorts is how I think that was named. Just generally being fatigued and heart weary, where you're just like, it's just been a lot. Like life's a lot, everything's a lot. Grateful. What are we talking about? Why? And then another one was unprocessed grief or trauma or pain from maybe other parts of one's life. So say, for instance, if you're encountering the real struggles of aging in a culture that is very ageist, there can be a lot of grief. And so, let's practice gratitude. Well, it's a lot easier at one of the places you feel the most safe to not express gratitude, but instead to be like, I'm frustrated and mad. Actually, about 40 other things in the way my kids are behaving toward me, but, so that's what we talked about. Yeah.
I would just say that grief in general is one of the big stiflers of gratitude. And there's so many, there's also many levels of grief that some is even recognized and some that isn't recognized, and especially that unrecognized grief, the things that you're disappointed about, frustrated about, missing, hurt, the pain. All of a sudden you realize it's really difficult to find that place, that well where you can be grateful from. Yeah.
I'm not going to represent the group so well because all I can think about is what I shared. Comparing myself to others, comparing one group to another group, making those comparisons is just, it pulls people apart.
Yeah, the way she talks about in the book is envy, is being envious of other circumstances or situations or some way that they have benefited that you haven't. Yeah. Envy is a big killer.
We've always thought that one of the main problems with the congregation is it's made up of people. If it weren't for the people, we'd all get along just fine.
It's funny, but it's true.
And kind of going along with that, there is no, we're a congregation, but there really isn't a hierarchy of order here. And so, in a business or in most other organizations, you can disagree, and there's somebody in a company who can say, thank you for sharing, here's what we're going to do. And we don't have that resolution mechanism in a church.
Were you going to say something? Thought I saw you gesturing.
So a couple of things. The first one is sometimes we may expect gratitude from groups, and the example that was used was students, where students are brought into a higher socioeconomic school district to experience that, and yet they're still straddled with all of the socioeconomic issues and poverty that they have. And so I think there's a practical issue of how can they build gratitude for something like that, and why should we expect them to have gratitude to show up when they still are left with very little. The other one is, we talked a little bit about this, is we're not wired to start with gratitude, right? And so a lot of times our brain steps in front of our heart, and our brain keeps us up at night worrying about things, and our brain keeps us anxious in the morning. We wake up in the morning, and then we go to our work or whatever we're doing, and we're anxious, and it's hard to retrain ourselves to think about gratitude in that. So we talked a little bit about that.
Just the fact that you just got done speaking, and some of you know that Jamie is leading one of our nonprofits that we have supported for a number of years. And I know if people have been in your position, they get burned out from this issue of gratitude, that they've done significant things, not because they're like, oh, I've done these things and nobody cares, but it's just like this ongoing taking, and without that sense of response, it can burn you out. Yeah.
As we were talking, I was particularly struck by just the thoughtlessness. I mean, and some of it's like you just forget because you're so busy and you're doing this and this happens and that happens, and the next thing you know, it's a week later and this and that and the other. Before you know it, you're like 5 miles or 5 months down the road into a really bad state of mind. So you literally, in a sense, are not taking the time to breathe, and this sort of Sabbath breath, I suppose, is. But I know that in my own experience, that's been where I'm like, wow, I haven't really been grateful for a long time, and I have a lot to be grateful for.
Totally failed.
We talked about stuff. You know me. What? My friend asked the question. Where have we seen that? Where there's been problematic, the lack of gratitude, and one of the things that she talks about in the book, and I've experienced certainly as a pastor at a church that some of you know, that sometimes people can offer something in a way that's not going to be helpful, or comes with strings attached. And so to be grateful for a gift that now obligates me in some way to do something different or outside the norm, or that comes with it, that's a complicated thing. Or of course, where a gift comes with so many strings that all of a sudden it's not a gift any longer. It's an obligation. Or it's a way for them to decide a path that is maybe contrary to the direction that we were going at another time. I would say, in contrast to that, all of us have experienced this, where we've gotten a note kind of out of the blue, and someone saying, you know, when you did this for me, I recognized it, and I just wanted you to know that I saw that, and I so appreciate that. Or thank you so much for your thoughtfulness, for, you know, whatever. I mean, just some of those little things can also be a course adjustment for the person that's recognizing you, but also for the person that receives. Oh my goodness, in a world where I spend a lot of time catching people doing wrong, that was just got caught doing right. And how affirming and encouraging that can be. And sometimes it just comes from a little bit of effort, right?
Well, that's a great segue to where I think let's go collectively in our last minutes together. Is what does it look like to create a culture of noticing, a culture of gratitude? So you just named like the way notes matter, the way catching someone doing good matters. I think about a really beloved member of this congregation who during COVID started randomly just sending me red heart emojis. And she said, this is my way to just name that I see you and thank you for the work that you're doing. She wouldn't say anything else. She just would send me a red heart. And they randomly in my days get a red heart. That was such a gift. So, so notes, other things, just raise your, either maybe just shout them out to each other and Jeff, if you restate what you hear, shout it out.
Sometimes I think we look for significant things to create gratitude. And before I retired, I started volunteering at Methodist. And my job was to take a warm washcloth and a newspaper to every patient in the hospital, starting about 7 o'clock in the morning. And the first time I thought, well, this is pretty stupid. Sorry, but but I did it. And first time I came home, I think I told Betty, I said, I got more gratitude in an hour and a half this morning than I did in the last 50 years in business. And all I'm doing is giving them a newspaper and a warm washcloth.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was boatloads of gratitude in that hospital just for doing that dumb little thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, others, the ways you think, what does it look like to create a culture of noticing?
Well, that makes me think maybe part of the culture needs to be able to accept the gratitude. So when you feel like what you did maybe wasn't that much or whatever, that somehow we help each other accept it.
Thank you. Yeah.
When we were talking about, you know, the comparing, you know, like how it's hard for people to compare, I was going to say, to me, it was more about being grateful for the things you can give rather than expecting people to be grateful for what they're getting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doctor.
Others?
Yeah, so I think this is kind of, as I think about the antidote to my own thoughtlessness, I think, like, being okay with not being productive all the time. And, like, just pausing.
Sabbath practices.
Yeah, just pause and take a breath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is actually, many of you know, Andy and I had a long journey with infertility, and I've been choosing a word of the year every year, and the year Josie was born, the word that came to me was savor, as in where Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. And I knew I was going to get to be a parent one time, and I know as a person who's found a lot of identity in external productivity that I didn't want to miss it. And so just practicing, like my whole year practicing presence, and it's changed me. Like I literally walk around, I'm like, everything is a miracle. I'm breathing. Did you know I'm breathing today? But it was through that practice. So that's been a gift.
This is very similar to that. I know when I worked in the hospital, one of the practices that we used with our units and things was from the field of psychology called 3 Good Things, where, and if you Google 3 Good Things, it's a very easy practice, but you know, as humans, we're wired to look for danger, and so we either fear, flight, or freeze, and so we always see danger in things first. So we're not wired to be grateful; we're wired to be fearful. We're wonderfully and fearfully made, lizard brain, and so the intentional practice is that throughout the day you notice 3 good things, and then at the end of your day you write those 3 things down, and it trains you to see good things to be grateful for. and which is sort of a common thing I think we're hearing throughout this whole conversation, is that, you know, in our current life and age, and, you know, there's so much stuff we're inundated with, to actually pause and say, oh, this person, you know, shared their, you know, dessert with me, or I walked outside and I felt the breeze, or, you know, my dog came home or next to me and I got to pet the dog for 10 minutes, and that was like amazing. I'm so grateful for that. So it doesn't have to be something, you know, wow, that's the best sunrise I ever saw. It could be, I saw a leaf on the ground today and it reminded me that life is fragile. Right? It doesn't be that deep either, whatever. But just, you know, whatever.
Yes.
3 good things. And then it's also a very powerful tool if you then partner with someone and you share. What were the 3 good things you saw? What were the 3 good things I saw? It takes, you know, 10 minutes, but it can really change how you interact with others and build resiliency in yourself. That was the work in the hospital, was to try build resiliency among the staff and ourselves. So. Oh, well, I mean, if you go into the studies of it, it says if you do this for 21 days, that it actually builds resiliency even after you stop after 21 days, that lasts for the next 6 months. Your sense of well-being and goodness, it builds that. Just like working a muscle, right? And then that muscle becomes stronger and more resilient.
Yeah, here, and let's bring it to Erin. And yeah, that makes me think about like what would be maybe as a community, like a Lenten practice or things that we could do around building capacity.
Well, like how can we do that with our kids? So we have to go get our kids in 30 seconds ago, but how can we, how can you all teach our kids? Because we have little kids, and I would love for them to know that Meeting House is a place where we celebrate the good things and we're gracious, and people ask little kids, what was a good thing that happened today? And here's something good that happened to me. You know, just make it a practice and a norm. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think of all of this, how does it translate to our kids? Because it's just like, that's the foundation of, you know, at least in my world.
And being able to affirm to them too that they are the gift. Like they're a gift here, and we're,
One thing that this book reminded me of is that we need to learn again, maybe for some of us, how to just be thankful. Silly illustration, but for many years I didn't own a snowblower. So when I got my first snowblower, it changed winter forever for me. So I would do all the people in my sphere. I did 6 driveways because I just loved being out there with my snowblower. And people said thank you, but I didn't get to blow my driveway for 6 weeks because they all felt obligated to me. So they went and did mine in return. I'm like, no, I want to blow
this. This is not why.
To just be able to say thank you and just leave it at that. It's just a gift with no ties, and just be grateful for a neighbor who would be kind, you know, or whatever. So not about me, but just that notion of.
Well, we are grateful that you all were here tonight. So thank you for being here. We'll be here again next week. We'll do the 2 sections of that. And I'm going to just send us then with, and you can, anyone who needs to leave can run. I'm going to send you with a poem from Mary Oliver about gratitude. Be still, my soul, and steadfast. Earth and heaven both are still watching. Though time is draining from the clock, and your walk that was confident and quick has become slow. So be slow if you must. But let the heart still play its true part. Love still as once you loved, deeply and without patience. Let God and the world know you are grateful that the gift has been given. Amen. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night.